Do you remember watching the documentary about Willowbrook and Letchworth?
Yes.
You do?
It was televised on network TV.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember offhand which network it was. I think it was CBS. But it was Geraldo Rivera.
Yep.
And it was a documentary about Letchworth. But I can't remember what the actual title of it was. I don't have it in front of me.
I don't remember watching. I do remember listening to it because when they rebroadcast it on 2020, and I had a severe sinus infection, and that was playing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nightmare fuel. Nightmare fuel. Hey, a little announcement before the show. Today, Matt and I have decided to start a Patreon. And as a thank you for the first 10 Patreon members at any level, you will get a certificate stating that you are a founding Patreon of Unearthly Upstate. We have 4 tiers. Hopefully one of them, if you want to support us through Patreon, will fit your budget. We have a $1 thank you tier, which is just what it says. You'll get a thank you from us every month for that tier. We have a $3 coffee tier, which not only do we give you a thank you every month, but you'll also be in on the newsletter that we'll be producing soon. A $5 tier, which is you get everything we stated before. Because you're now a supporter of the podcast, you will get to listen to a Patreon-only podcast. Those podcasts will eventually be put on into regular rotation, but you get to hear them first. And our top tier is a $10 associate producer. Not only do you get everything I just mentioned, but you also get producer credit at the end of the show. So if you want to sign up for Patreon, this is a great time to do it. Remember, the first 10 people are going to be given certificates as founder Patreons. Thank you, and now on to the show. Welcome to Unearthly Upstate.
Welcome.
I'm Mari Minette.
Welcome. I'm Matthew.
And today we're going to be heading pretty close to downstate.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty close. Although we are a show that promises you ghost stories and folklore, and if you're promising ghost stories, you are going to have to talk about asylums. Mm-hmm. And this particular one, I don't think it's the most famous asylum in New York. There's one out on the west side that's more famous than this one. But it definitely has its place in history in the public mind.
Yes.
And the one we're going to be talking about is called Letchworth Village. Haunted asylums are a staple of ghost hunting shows, or any show of the paranormal. Even if you do not believe in ghosts, the history of some of these places can be enough to haunt you. Tales of mistreatment of patients, from the believable, such as staff stretched too thin, to the dramatic, such as a cruel doctor performing horrible experiments. Which I think is pretty much par for the course in any of these places.
Yeah.
Stories, yeah. So far, it sounds like any other asylum story, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for now.
Straddling Havershaw and Stony Point, New York, on hundreds of acres of land, which is now a parkland, and shared with golf courses, schools, government buildings, and churches, the remains of one infamous asylum sits waiting its fate. The asylum has its share of hauntings, strange noises such as doors slamming, whispers, footsteps, knocking, furniture moving. Most of the noises are attributed to the spirits of long-dead children playing in the hallways of the asylum they were forced to call home. Some people have been shoved, seen items thrown across the room, even held back by something they could not see, and in one case, a 7-foot-tall thing with backward bent legs and glowing eyes. And that was the description in what I read, a 7-foot-tall thing. I think we're going to H.P. Lovecraft territory in this respect, you know.
Or a creepypasta.
To call Letchworth Village an asylum is not correct. The word asylum usually brings up images of a large castle-like structure dominating the landscape on which it sits. Letchworth Village is not that. It's a group of buildings designed to be like its namesake, a village. A village to house the discarded, the uncared for, and the incurable. A total of 130 buildings filled the 2,000 acres of land. A creek divides the land in two. In the original plans, on one side of Miniscano, I know I'm mispronouncing it. I'm going to...
Minisciango?
Minisciango?
Minisciango Creek.
Minisciango Creek was for males, and the other side was for females. There were separate buildings for the infirm, for children, and able-bodied adults. The adults, until the 1960s, worked the farm, raising food and livestock to be used by the village. Okay, that'll give you a quick overview of what life was supposed to be like, anyway.
Right, exactly. And this idea behind work as therapy.
Yes, yeah. And also it kind of makes sense. I know they use it in some places, not nowadays. It's not work as therapy, more as job skills, giving people skills they can use on the outside, be a medical facility or a correctional one. But it still goes on today in a lot of these types. Not so much, I don't think, the back-breaking work. As we go on, you're going to find out that some of these people even help build the buildings. They help, clear the land. I think nowadays, more the job training is geared more to, well, you still do the food service and the farms. There's still places that, do that. Are geared more towards clerical and light assembly. So not so much back-breaking work anymore because of now it's not therapy. Letchworth Village did not start out to be a place to hide undesirables away. It was actually a dream of William Letchworth to use his wealth to support his Quaker beliefs. He wanted to help the unfortunate and give them a safe place to live. In 1875, he championed the children's law. This law removed children ages 2 to 16 from almhouses and poorhouses. They were placed in asylums or foster families. Let's set the scene here. We're talking in 1875. Poorhouses and almhouses. Okay, what were those? You can't pay your bill, we're going to lock you up here. Oh, you got a family? Well, guess what? They're going with you. I mean, it was, how can you pay your bill when you're locked up? You think it's ridiculous. But that was very common in England, common in America at that time. If you were destitute, they'd lock you away.
Debtor's prison. De facto debtor's prison.
De facto prisoners. If you were just hanging out where you weren't supposed to, they'd lock you away. I've got a cat here eyeing the table, and I'm trying to get the things off that he's going to knock off. So here he comes. There. Lloyd has now visited us. So you get these people that nowadays would be on welfare. They locked them up, families and all. So we're discussing poorhouses while our producer Lloyd is being a twerp. Anyway, like I said, that's where they put you away. Nowadays, you'd be on welfare. Back then, your entire family would be put in this place. If you need, any reference to it, well, Charles Dickens wrote about it.
Oh, yes.
It gives you an idea. I mean, so that's what William Letchworth was trying to stop. He was trying to find a different way to help people other than just shut them away, and especially children, because what did the children do to be there? I mean, the parents fell on hard times, but the children deserved to be punished. So that was his first goal, was to find a way to help people. And so this is the start of his dream. Okay.
Right.
He was appointed president of the New York State Board of Charities in 1878. While president, he pushed for a new progressive model of care. At the time, large asylums and almhouses were destinations of the disabled, the poor, and the mentally challenged. He supported the idea of a self-sustaining village with a working farm. Under the care of physicians, the residents could lead a more productive life. Great idea.
Absolutely.
On paper, it sounds like a great idea. Yep. William Letchworth, unfortunately, did not get to see his dream opened. On July 10th, 1911, the first patients were admitted into the village, including Gustav Jacobson, the first boy to be admitted to Letchworth Village. He came with a group of 62 other boys from Randall Island, an island in Manhattan that at the time had an orphanage, a poorhouse, a burial ground for the poor, an idiot asylum, and the New York House of Refuge, and a reform school for juvenile delinquents, or juvenile vagrants, as they were referred to. By the time Gustav left the village in the 1920s, he had helped farm the land and build some of the roads and the properties. A building was named in his honor in 1980, but that was destroyed by fire in 2010. And one of the problems you're going to find out with Letchworth is they did get a lot of people that were shipped up from downstate to the hospital, to the village.
Basically just a way of dumping their undesirables onto another community.
Which still occurs today.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
A lot of cities dump many of their mentally disabled people into a facility.
Cities. Yeah.
I'm speaking, of course, of a facility. I can't remember the name of it. It's in Syracuse.
Yeah.
I think it's run by the Salvationists. I think it's run by the Salvation Army.
Oh yeah, they had that big news article a few years back about that it wasn't even from another city in New York. It was from down south somewhere, and they would literally send their homeless and the people that needed the help up to Syracuse, and Syracuse was basically being dumped on. They were the Salvation Army is doing what they could. To help these people, but they really could only help them for 30 days, and now they're stuck up here in New York.
They were only eligible to stay in the program for a determined length of time. It wasn't indefinite.
So now
and then once their time in the program ended,
so just think about the poor person that was shipped up here. He's got no connections.
Yeah.
You just shipped him off to someplace where he's got no connections. At least where they came from, there might be a chance there's family or friends that could eventually reach out and help them if they want help. I mean, there are some very hard luck cases that they don't want the help, or they don't realize the help's available. It's a whole tangled mess. We're still fighting with this today. So.
Well, what about the two prominent physicians that worked at Letchworth?
George Jervis and Hilary Kropowski?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to get to them. Now, I will say that some people are not. Well, I'm going to say, let's just say human trials in medicine have changed greatly since this. And I'm going to say this was some of the things we're going to talk about coming up. Very common practice in any of these type of facilities at the time period. Things have changed. There are now rules in place. I will say, though, in these two doctors' cases, though, even though you may not agree with the methods, the outcomes were positive.
Right.
Okay. So, starting with Jervis. There is a rare disorder called, and forgive me, I'm going to try to have this written phonetically for a reason, phenylketonuria.
Phenylketonuria.
Thank you. This disorder can cause intellectual disability, seizures, behavioral and mental disorders if left untreated. Dr. George Jervis discovered that the disorder was inherited and developed a treatment in 1939. His discovery helped develop a treatment for the disorder. He worked at Letchworth at the time and had patients there he could test. That sounds very nice. You could argue that the patients had no choice in the matter.
Pretty much.
Maybe he chose Letchworth because there was a population of people affected by this disorder. Turns out this is a disorder that is actually cured nutritionally if it's caught in time.
Oh, wow.
I read a little bit about it on Wikipedia. I can't think of much more than that, but it is an inherited disorder, but if there's a certain diet you follow, it really reduces the effects of what this disorder will do to you.
The principal effects, of course, aforementioned phenylketonuria, the intellectual disability, seizures, behavioral and mental disorders.
Yeah. He was the one that figured out it was inherited. He was the one that figured out it was a genetic disease. So that, give him props for that. So, The other one, Dr. Hilary Kropowski, had been working on an oral vaccine for polio. In Letchworth, he used himself and 19 children that were patients there to test the live virus. The test worked. 17 of the children developed antibodies and no one developed complications. Now, human trials like that, now there are rules set up so you couldn't just pick, 18 kids and just inject them with anything.
Yeah.
I will give him props. He injected himself first. So I think he felt so confident about this live vaccine because the polio vaccine that had just came out with Salk was a dead dead virus vaccine.
This was a live.
This was a live virus vaccine.
Virus vaccine.
I give him props for testing himself, because he must have really, really been sure in his research, or he wouldn't have injected himself.
Researchers continue to do that. Today.
Yeah, and I give them props for that. They're really literally putting themselves, where the research is. Yeah, I'm thinking of the guy who proved ulcers were caused by.
It was caused by what was
bacteria.
It? Bacteria, I think.
Yeah, bacteria of the gut actually causes a lot of ulcers, and he proved it by drinking the bacteria to develop ulcers.
And then giving themselves the treatment to, and the ulcer went away.
Yep.
Which is interesting.
So, researchers still do it. They'll still use themselves as guinea pigs. But
this is the late 30s and early 40s we're talking about here.
Yeah. And plus, these kids really have a choice in the matter.
Well, he had 19 kids. 17 developed the antibodies. Well, what about the other 2 kids?
Well, none of them developed complications. They just didn't develop the antibodies to it.
Oh, okay.
So it was a very successful test.
So no harm done.
No harm done. Like I said, part of these horror stories that come out of these asylums are the mistreatment of patients, of these horrible research being done on them. These were pretty benign. You wouldn't have been able to do it like that today. There's a lot of red tape in the way. Mm-hmm. But you got to admit, they did their research led them to. Well, we had to go to human trials, and there's the standing population here. Yeah, it was kind of the ends justify the means type thing. But at the same token, nowadays you couldn't just take 19 kids that happened to be at a developmental school and just test them on anything. I mean, exactly. Oh my God, that would be such the outcry from that. But back then, no, that again kind of goes back to what they were doing the poorhouses and the alms houses. Well, just put them away here, And if you're wondering why the parents of these kids weren't hollering, if you're wondering why the parents of the other people that were tested on for the other thing weren't stepping in, the relatives, well, guess what? Once these people were in this place, very unlikely relatives would come, ever.
Oh, yeah, that's a good lead into the next part of the article here. That by the 40s, the dream of Letchworth began to unravel. And the village had more patients than it was built to handle. By 1935, there were already up to capacity of 3,000 patients, but other institutions like Bellevue still sent patients to Letchworth. And by the 60s, there were over 5,000 patients at Letchworth. And the overcrowding and the lack of employees, even though it was one of the largest employers in the area, employing up to 10,000 people, there were not enough staff to take care of the patients like they should. And it was not due to heartlessness or anything, nefarious on the part of the staff. It was due to lack of funding and lack of, there's only 24 hours in one day, and not only 2 nurses per every 80 patients.
Now just think of that. You've got 5,000 people there that need to be taken care of.
Wow.
2 per 80. So you're talking like 500 nurses aren't enough.
No. Not at all.
And then you got support staff. I mean, it's not just nurses and doctors work at these hospitals. You got administration, you got food service, you've got custodians, you've got handymen. Yeah, there's a lot of people employed here, and they can't keep up with the population.
Up to 10,000 people.
Yeah. So people say it was understaffed. It's not for lack of trying. I mean, they were employing a small town. The amount of people they were employing. So it was definitely a money issue at this point. So
yeah, that's for sure.
But which leads us to the fact there were 2 journalists that started researching the rumors of places like this and started to bring about some change. One more dramatic than the other. So the rumors of mistreatment, cruelty to the patients, and horrific experiments. Healthy adult male patients no more than slave labor in the village. Well, that goes back to work in the farm. Okay. Stories of non-empathic staff abusing patients. And in an annual report from 1921, Dr. Charles Little divided the patients into 3 groups. The imbecile, the moron, and the idiot. Yeah, that just shows you how far we've come since 1921.
Well, these were all legitimate terms back in 1921. We're talking pre-eugenics
I think eugenics was coming into the favor at that point. Yeah.
But it didn't really come into full swing until the 30s.
Yeah. I'm going to say this. All my research on Letchworth, that never came up as one of the things that Letchworth did.
That eugenics never came to Letchworth is interesting.
I'm sure there was proponents of it that worked there. Okay. Yeah. I maybe should back up and explain to people to understand what we're talking about. Eugenics. There was 20s and 30s. I think even up to like the 50s, it was still going on in some of these institutions. There was a big move that basically said anybody who's got a mental disability, anyone who's got a mental illness,
right.
In other words, you're just not quite right, and you're in one of these facilities, you should not be allowed to reproduce. So there was forced sterilization. And it was to, I hate to use this term, but it was used to keep the regular population pure. Anyone with Down syndrome was sterilized. They had no choice. You're in these hospitals. Now, I never saw mention of it in Letchworth in all my research I did on Letchworth. So it might have been one of the few hospitals where it wasn't commonly done. But the amount that was done in a lot of these places, I can't say Letchworth was totally innocent of it. I can't say it wasn't either. I just didn't see anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because who knows what happened there went unreported.
Exactly. So.
And if things were so overcrowded and overworked, who is going to take care of everyone? Keep track of everyone, that is.
Yeah.
And make sure that patients didn't fall into the hands of one of these eugenics doctors who just happened to probably be, visiting on an internship or something like that. And I'm sure that it was a revolving door of physicians, probably.
And you also have to consider that some of these problems that they would, people that had they get sterilized can be helped now. I mean, if you're bipolar now, they try to give you the right medicines to straighten you out, but otherwise, you pretty much can live a normal life. You can have kids. You can,
right.
But back then, you're bipolar. You're not even going to give you the choice.
Well, genetics was just coming in as a science, and it's another one of these sciences where they knew just enough about it to be dangerous.
That's the way to put it. Yeah,
and really understand that we're still discovering things about genetics, and that's putting to rest a lot of assumptions that we used to have about genetics.
Yeah. And visitors reported seeing children being malnourished and lethargic. The staff would have to shove food down the throats of children.
Force feeding.
Some of the force feeding was reportedly done because they didn't have time to feed them like they should. And go, well, we've got 2 nurses per 80 patients, and maybe like 40 of these can't feed themselves. Yeah, you're going to, I hate to say it, human nature, you're going to start cutting corners because you got to feed one kid to get to the other kid because the other kid's hungry. Yeah, it's a horrible situation, but I can kind of understand what happened with the caretakers. They were under a lot of pressure, and things happen.
They probably how often do the nurses employ the help of staff on board with Letchworth who had other jobs, who were then kind of recruited for the moment to help the nurses out with some of their duties. Who knows how often that happened, and that just exacerbated the rumors about mistreatment.
In the 1940s, Irving Haberman released shocking photos of the inside of Letchworth. The photos supported some of the rumors. They showed patients unbathed, neglected, wallowing in their own filth. The public was outraged, but the hospital was still considered one of the best and remained open. Okay.
Isn't that something?
Put that through your head for a minute. It was one of the best, and they're finding
puts that into perspective with how advanced the other facilities were regarded as.
Yeah. Well, the other asylums that we're going to be touching upon in New York were fortresses. This is the only one that really had an open plan. The other ones that I have in my lead file are built like medieval fortresses, and they are there to keep you there. This one at least allowed the patients some freedom, so I could see why it was considered one of the best.
Mm-hmm.
It did have some forward thinking going on.
Mm-hmm.
But then in 1972, the most famous journalistic expose happened about.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just about Letchworth. In fact, it was more about Willowbrook and down in New York City. And it was in 1972. A documentary by ABC News reporter Geraldo.
ABC News. Oh, okay.
In 1972, a documentary by ABC News reporter Geraldo Rivera titled Willowbrook, The Last Great Disgrace, was aired. The documentary was an investigation of the treatment of the intellectually disabled people by the state of New York. Majority of the documentary focused on the Willowbrook State School, but investigations were also done at Letchworth. The residents of Willowbrook and Letchworth Village were living in dirty, overcrowded conditions. Lack of clothing, hygiene, and basic needs were not being met. This was due to the overcrowding and lack of funding. Yeah, that documentary, it's available free online. Mm-hmm. You can either go to Geraldo Rivera's website or it's on a couple places on YouTube. Mm-hmm. If you've never watched it, watch it. It's disturbing.
Yeah, I remember seeing that on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a one that's called
shocking.
Return to Willowbrook, where they interviewed some of the same people they'd interviewed in the first documentary, like 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And some things got a lot better. I mean, the reforms that happened because of this really did help. Some things remain the same. Mm-hmm. We still need to do some reforms in this area, but between the years of 1972 and when Letchworth was closed in 1996, changes had been made in how the mentally ill and the mentally disabled were treated. The now 8,000 patients, can you imagine that? They only had room for 3,000, now they have 8,000. The 8,000 patients were moved to other living situations with organizations like ARC assisting in the relocation. The doors were shut in 1996, and then the stories of the hauntings began. And like I said, the towns have been using most of this property. Not all of it is developed. There are golf courses on it, churches, schools. If you just look at it on Google Maps, you might be surprised at how many buildings were converted and used by other groups now. Mm-hmm. They are still trying to develop the land. There's a lot of acreage there. It's laying fallow, really. A lot of plans of putting another golf course in, plans of putting luxury apartments, shopping centers. But the problem is you got two townships that have to approve the development. So whoever develops this land has to satisfy both townships. Absolutely. So they do run into a lot of brick walls. And sometimes the developer's a great idea, the townships approve it, and then the developer goes, I'm not doing it.
Right.
So, yeah, it's been interesting. But also on the property, there is a cemetery with a memorial that states, "Those who will not be forgotten." Most of the plots are unmarked. Many were buried with just a serial number marking their grave. There are records that are kept in the archives of Letchworth Village, so the information of who is buried there can be found. But these are remains of those who were never claimed, the remains of those who had been shut away and left by families and society. Remember what I said?
Yeah, that circles back to what we were saying before about people just dumping their difficult child off at Letchworth and then never visiting, never even writing a letter.
Well, like in Rain Man, the one brother never knew he had the other brother because they just took Raymond and shoved him in the hospital, the facility, and never said anything. In that case, they did visit him, but they never let the brothers meet. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, it still happens. Maybe they're not sent to a mental institution. Maybe the family buys them a house way out in the woods somewhere and tells them, "There you go."
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a lot of people like that during my college days.
Yeah.
When kids would, Wisconsin has its own downstate.
Yeah.
Madison.
Anything north of Madison, pretty much,
Anything north of Highway 53 basically is considered the sticks.
Well, some people say 27, but okay.
But yeah, our conversations will sometimes segue back to our home state, Wisconsin, as an example.
Oh, Main 70. I forget.
Oh, okay, right.
People listening from Wisconsin, I'm sorry. It's been years since I've been in the state. I forgot about the main roads.
And we don't have a map in front of us. So,
but basically, you know what we're talking about. It's like the downstate in Wisconsin is pretty much Madison and south. And I would say mainly southeast, because you got to go through, because I think the southwest is not considered part of the downstate. But yeah, once you go north of Madison, there is kind of that attitude of like, well, that's where we're going to ship our problems away.
There's a cultural disconnect between the people, the affluence of the downstate area in Wisconsin and the Jack Pine savages of the north.
Like upstate up here.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So there are a lot of similarities. That's why we fit in so well in upstate.
Maybe that could be because culturally here in upstate, it's very close to what you find in Wisconsin. Anyway.
But it's still.
And
go ahead.
I noticed. I noticed in college there are a lot of kids being sent from the Madison area, Milwaukee, those areas. Not so much in the La Crosse area or across the river from the Twin Cities, because that was just, straight west of us. Yeah. Basically almost on a parallel between where we were living and those areas. But a lot of kids get sent up to and expected to get all the knots out of their rope for some reason, and they just basically get dumped there, for a couple semesters. And hope that, that straightens them out somehow.
Well, college is too expensive to do that now, but you still get it here. You still get people, their families don't know what else to do with them. So, like you said, they'll rent them an apartment or they'll buy them a house and say, hey, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
And, stick them up in the rural areas. That's not really giving them help.
No.
And maybe the person doesn't need help. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe sometimes that's a good thing. They need to get away from the family.
Exactly.
But yeah, you still see this attitude from some people, like, well, we don't want to deal with this family member, so bye. They just shut them out. But
and not much to do with ghosts, but definitely lays the groundwork for ghosts.
It goes back to that cemetery. These were people who were unclaimed, and other facilities also have their graveyards like that too, where you will have people who are being kept, other family members don't want anything to do with them even after they die, and now the state's needs to put them somewhere, so they often have cemeteries on site, because you still have to be respectful after someone passes away. It doesn't matter if that person was an inmate, or it doesn't matter if that person was a lifetime resident of some care facility. It's just, there is some heartlessness with some of these families. Some of it may be a monetary thing where they would love to take their loved one back. They would love to give them proper burial, but they can't. So I can't say it was all cruelty on the fact of the parent of the family that left the people there.
And there were exclusively burials, no cremations.
Right. Right. But they did keep records, so it's not like some places you found that hit the news every so often, where they'll find a cemetery is unmarked and there's absolutely no records of it, and there'll be hundreds of people buried there. Or like an institution, or worse yet, Native American schools is one that pops in my head, where they found this cemetery. And I forget, this one might have been in Canada, I read about recently, where they found hundreds of graves. And no one bothered to keep records. And that's a whole other horror story.
I remember when we were living in Rhode Island, and there were a lot of facilities such as Letchworth, a lot of pauper houses and a lot of poorhouses and whatnot, where there's just markers in certain areas where the cemeteries are, but no actual gravestones or any records of who's underneath the ground.
Remember our last summer in Rome? We finally found that one cemetery, because we're MVCC. Where that is in Rome, there's a path, a beautiful path. Nice job there, Rome. But off this lovely walking path, there is a cemetery there, because prior to the college taking it over, it had been one of these poor farms. And the cemetery there is just like the one here at Letchworth, where people had to be buried. They had, they were in that poor farm that passed away, and nobody claimed him.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to Rome, there's a good example of one. And I believe they found most of the names. I can't remember right, but isn't there something in the cemetery where they have the names they did connect to the people that were buried there? I can't remember exactly, but I think that was there.
Yeah.
You guys can correct us in the comments if I'm wrong, but
right, exactly.
I think that's what it was. We only went to that cemetery like twice, so
always
I can't remember.
Feel free to take anything we say on this program and do your own research.
Please, yes. Letchworth, like I said, is open. You can visit this place. You can go and drive, see the buildings. Don't go into the buildings. They are very, very poorly maintained.
Many of the buildings have been refurbished and whatnot.
Yeah, the ones that are nicely refurbished are probably run by probably an elementary school. Probably going to find a firehouse there. But the buildings that haven't been touched, there was, like was mentioned before, there was a rash of fires that destroyed a lot of them or gutted them. So do not go into the buildings, whatever you do. They are dangerous. But you can go there during daylight hours. Don't go at night. You're going to get arrested. You can go there and see this place. Yeah,
there's a strict no trespassing law.
Exactly. But before you go, you should probably check the papers in the places to see, if this development has gone through, because you don't want to show up there and find out, they're doing all this construction and it's gone.
Yeah, and do feel free to stop by the cemetery and pay your respects to those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, please visit them.
And these kind of cemeteries, they're a lot of the reason for the legends behind hauntings.
Oh, yes.
People improperly buried, improperly laid to rest. And that's sometimes where a lot of these legends of hauntings begin.
Could you say these hauntings could be some societal guilt because people do feel kind of bad about just shutting these people away? And
there are a lot of people around the area that still remember when the place was, they were residents when the place was open. So.
Or they worked there. 10,000 people worked there, so I mean.
Yeah, I would say that more or less the people who used to work there would have some reason for concern.
Yeah, so, well, that was Letchworth Village. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yes.
But we did get a review.
Oh, fantastic.
I can remember it by heart. I don't even look it up. It came on Podbean, and it just said, I like the candid conversation. I'll take that as a positive.
Right.
I'm not sure. It was on our Soft Paranormal Part 1, and I like the candid conversation, so thank you. I didn't get the name of the person, unfortunately. So we got our first review. Yay! Lovely. It was a positive. Yay! So,
thank you for listening to our ghastly podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to Unearthly Upstate. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, and on our webpage. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, and Google Podcasts. Please like, share, and review, and if you really like us, tell your friends. Unearthly Upstate is an animated Lyre Media production. The show is produced by Matt and Mari Minette, with purring provided by Honey and Lloyd. Research and writing done by Mari Minette. Music is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Unless stated otherwise in the episode, the places mentioned in the broadcast have not paid or contacted us for any type of promotion. And please check out our webpage for full credit and sources for the episodes.